Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kendamil's channel for pediatric healthcare professionals. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Stephanie Hoff, and I'm a pediatric dietitian, and I'm also the healthcare manager for the Kendamil infant formula brand. Today, we're really going to be diving in on the topic of introducing solid foods and really how a healthcare professional can really support parents along this new and exciting journey for their infants. I'm really excited to be joined by Jessica Enderly. She is a very experienced dietitian as well. She has her own practice, Baby Food and Fun, and she's really going to be sharing her experience and what she has recommended parents and families, and really just sharing her knowledge. So welcome, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, we're excited to go ahead and get started. So, I know that introducing solid foods is a very exciting time, but it can also be really stressful. So I'm really excited to kind of pick your brain and kind of hear about the tips and tricks that you have. So, I know for many parents, figuring out when to start
hmm
can be really confusing because we sometimes hear 4 months, but you could also do 6 months. So, what would you recommend to a pediatrician or just a healthcare provider who is getting these questions asked by parents?
Absolutely. I think that is one gap right now because what are you looking for? 4-month old is very different from a 6-month old, quite
Yeah.
frankly. So we're really looking more at milestones. We're
Okay.
looking at what is the infant capable of doing, and that is going to let us know when we're ready to start solid. So, for example, a really, really important milestone is baby holding head up well and sitting up well. If they can hold their head up well for quite a while, that's usually a good indication that we're getting close to that time to start solids. Another really good indicator would be if baby is starting to show interest in foods. You might see baby reaching out for, if mom and dad are eating or,
Mhm.
drinking something, they'll kind of grab. That's another really good actual milestone to kind of indicate that you might be getting close to that time to start solids.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
So more so probably thinking about milestones versus just, okay, the 4 month mark, we have to start introducing solid foods. Okay. That's a
Absolutely.
super helpful tip. Okay. Great.
Absolutely.
Um, so the next question, I feel like that is just really kind of confusing, but I think parents are kind of hearing, both sides of the story is, do we start with introducing, purees or baby-led weaning? That has become such a popular term that I think a lot of parents are learning more about and are interested in. And so, what can a pediatrician do to kind of help guide parents in whatever path that they want to go?
Absolutely. That's a great question, too. So, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about my own personal journey with this because my daughter is almost 7 right now. And actually, that was around the time that baby led weaning even became a thing. So, when my daughter was, born, that was really not even a huge thing yet. So, we went ahead and did purees because partly that was, really what was known at the time. And a real big difference with the two is really just with the purees, you are feeding baby. So the parent is a little more in control, if you will. And of course, the textures are going to be different. So with a puree, you're really going to have kind of that smooth texture. It's usually a little easier to digest since it's a little, I'm going to say broken down, but kind of, smoother,
Yeah.
liquidy kind of texture. So sometimes that is a good place to start. And that's one reason that's usually been the place to start before. Baby led weaning came on board. Like I was saying, kind of really in the last 5 years, I think has really exploded. And the big difference here is baby has more control. So baby is able to use their hands and decide if they want to eat, whatever food you put in front. They don't like it, maybe they don't grab it, and that's okay. So it gives baby a lot more control, which hopefully helps foster a really good relationship with food
Yeah.
overall. So that's kind of a really big difference in the two different approaches, if you will. um One concern I hear with baby led weaning is, of course, is it, a choking risk, or there
Yeah.
choking hazards? And there are. The important thing is just making sure to serve foods appropriately for your child's age. So there are recommended ways to cut certain things and serve certain things. You could serve them, let's say, for example, like steamed. That would make things softer.
Mhm.
Um, those would be different ways that you would, I guess, mitigate the choking risks or hazards.
Yeah, okay, that's a really good point. So it almost, I mean, it probably depends too on what a parent feels most comfortable with. Like, do they want to be in control, or do they want to kind of let their baby take control and have fun touching the foods and exploring things? Um, so are there any, websites or books that pediatricians, healthcare providers can steer families towards that, like, you have found helpful, especially with the baby-led weaning, and
Absolutely.
how it's a higher risk for, choking hazards, because that's definitely something that we don't want to add that on to the parents' stressful plate.
No, we surely do not. So I do have my own website, www.babyfoodandfun.com. So we do have some tips and tricks on there. I also have an Instagram that has some different tips and tricks on how to cut things, how to
Oh,
serve,
great.
all of that good stuff. Quite frankly, I use the American Academy of Pediatrics a fair amount. So they do have resources available for pediatricians as well as families. So that's a great resource
Okay.
also. And then there's also just a couple other, I'm gonna say, influencers.
Yeah.
But there really are, some great resources out there. For example, Starting Solids. That is a group that, if you literally just Google Starting Solids, they will come up.
Okay.
They've done really well. 101 foods and before one, 101 foods before one is another, so
I
there's
love that.
definitely resources out there. It's really just narrowing it down to what's a good resource, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, no, but I mean, I think you listed some great options that will be extremely helpful. So I guess, another big question is, well, we'll talk about, the foods to start with, but one I'm thinking of is, okay, so let's say we decided to do the pureed route, or we're going to do the baby led weaning. Well, what about breastfeeding? And what
Yeah.
about if they're taking formula? What if they're doing both? Where does that fall? And what would happen if all of a sudden the baby doesn't want their formula or breast milk? I could see that being really stressful for the parent. So what can we do?
That is a good question. So, first off, before I address that, I want to go back 1 second. You can do both purees and baby led weaning, by the way.
Oh,
So, you can, kind of choose your times where I'm going to let baby have some control here. I'm going to cut things up or whatever, but then maybe I don't have time to deal with that. So, on this particular meal, I will give purees and I will be in a little more control. So that's always an option
that's
too.
really good to know. I thought it was one or the other.
No, no, you can definitely do both. That's something I did with my second is I started with purees, but I just kind of gradually included both really.
Okay. Well, that's
So
awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah, so back to your question about, your breast milk or your formula. Number one, in that first year of life, breast milk or formula or both, whichever, combination you're
Mhm.
using there, that is your primary nutrition source. So that should always be first. So for
Okay.
example, if you wake baby up in the morning and baby's hungry, you want to go ahead and give your breast milk, your formula, however you're feeding. That's your priority. And then if baby's still hungry, or maybe you've developed some kind of routine where baby can kind of play with food or something to expose, that's when you would give that. We use that term complementary foods. kind of in that sense. So again, that formula, the breast milk is first, and then it's just kind of complementary to that. It is just the experience for them to learn and kind of start to experience foods. Once baby reaches a year, that's when we start shifting over a little more towards the foods being primary nutrition.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's probably a disconnect that parents don't really hear about. And I think that's probably something that a pediatrician, a dietitian, whoever they're seeing could really stress that to parents, that it is complementary. So they don't have to stress out if their
Right.
baby isn't super interested in solid foods one day. Um, because I think that could be really stressful for parents.
It is really
They almost
stressful.
focus more on the solid foods than the
Yes,
formula or
yes.
breast milk.
Yes, and I think it's important to know that this is a very gradual process. Let's say we do start introducing around maybe 5 months. Baby's ready around 5 months.
Mhm.
I mean, you're really looking all the way to 12 months beyond, actually, because I'm still introducing foods to my kiddo, and he just turned 2. So,
Yeah.
it's really a very gradual process. Something that I would try to do is I would try to introduce a new food like every other day. And of course, there are certain foods, those common allergens, which I think we'll
Yes.
talk about in a little bit here. But overall, every other day, that's enough time that you'd be able to see if something was up. But it's
Okay.
also enough time for baby to kind of get used to that food, that texture, whatever, and then do something new. Maybe baby on day 1 wasn't hungry, so they didn't really touch it. Maybe day 2, you guys had a really busy morning and now baby's really hungry. So now they're really into it. That happens too. I have
Yeah.
a fluctuating appetite. So
True.
so
No,
does
that's a
baby.
great point. Yeah. So, would you also recommend that parents should always give breast milk or formula first every single mealtime and then the solid foods? Okay. So that's
Yeah.
something that their doctors can share with them as well.
Yes. Yep. That is
Okay.
usually the schedule I recommend is literally those are going to be your first feeds, the formula, the breast milk. And then again, maybe sneak in 1 meal a day or 2 meals a day, depending on how old baby is. I think that's important too. We don't have to have 3 meals a day right away.
Like us,
That's
right?
not feasible for
Yeah.
baby. So it is a really gradual
Okay.
process.
So there's flexibility in the schedule, which I think is really good to
Absolutely.
know.
Absolutely. I think that overall, infant feeding has become something that people want to put in a box, but everyone's lives are so different. So, yes, there's tons of flexibility in ways that you can make
Yeah,
it work for you.
that's really, really good to know. Okay, so my next question is, where do we start? So if we're going to be starting with solid foods, is there like a number one food that we should start with? Like, in
Yeah.
your experience, what have you recommended? What have you tried? What's worked? What hasn't worked?
Yes. So there's kind of a couple different groups of foods I would recommend first. So like I said, personally, I did purees first. Again, that's up to each person. But some veggies are always a big hit. So peas, green beans, carrots, those are really, really good ones to include. Some fruits, those are good. Those grains, I know we've probably heard a lot about different cereals and things, but those grains are awesome to include. A lot of them also have extra iron added to them. So that's really good for baby, especially as baby gets older. The stores
Okay.
in baby's body actually decrease after they're
Oh,
born.
and when does that typically happen?
So it actually happens around like 3 to 6 months is when
Okay.
those iron stores kind of start to decrease. So that is when it's a great time to
That
include
makes sense.
those grains and whatnot that have some iron in them. So oatmeal was a really big hit in our family. Cream of wheat was a big hit.
Okay.
Grits is actually a
Oh,
pretty big hit here.
yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't think about that one.
Yeah, and so other reasons I love these, starters for like the oatmeal, the grits, the cream of wheat, because then you can also add in other foods. So for example, I would add in, pureed applesauce or applesauce,
Okay.
you know what I mean, pureed fruits,
Yeah.
or a little bit of cow's milk maybe, just enough that there's your next exposure right there once you're
Good
done.
point. Yeah. So you're like
So
almost like starting with a base and then building on it. So I've heard this as well, that it's almost better to start with vegetables, because then I think then the baby doesn't prefer the sweeter taste of the
mhm.
fruit. I mean, do you recommend that, or what do you think?
um I've heard that too. I guess I followed that to some degree, but
Okay.
in my
So
opinion,
parents can do whatever.
yeah, don't do whatever. But yeah, I feel like I wouldn't stress quite as much about that in particular. Offer it all, offer that variety. There's no reason not to. If you do want to start with those veggies first, that's perfect.
Okay. But there's not like a checklist that you feel parents like need to follow. Okay, we did this vegetable, then we're going to move on to, I mean, because there are some parents out there that really like to track things and kind of have a
There
detailed
are,
plan.
yes, there are. Quite frankly, I was involved in like a research study quite a while ago, and part of what we did was like a monthly survey about introducing, which foods we'd introduce, and it was really helpful to be able to kind of track that. I know like the 101 foods before one, that is a system that they do actually have that kind of checklist.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, so absolutely, I'm sure you've got me thinking already too. That is
Yeah.
something that absolutely I can understand parents wanting to have, is a quick checklist. Yeah.
Yeah, because I could see, going to your pediatrician and saying, give me a list
Mhm.
of foods that I could start with, because then I
Mhm.
think it probably makes the parent feel more comfortable. They have a direction versus like, go ahead. And as
Right.
long as it's a pureed, you're fine.
Right.
Um,
Speaking of another really good one to start with, like plain yogurts and such, because a lot of times infants have already really had like cow's milk. So usually cow's milk is either in,
the formula.
the formula, or really, in breast milk, you've been exposed in that way too. So that's another really good place to start too.
Okay. And now, can parents just start with yogurt, or does it need to be like baby yogurt? Does it matter?
My biggest thing, just make sure it's plain.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I don't think you have to get specific, baby yogurt, and honestly, I don't want to say all baby food marketing is, but there are some foods that you can definitely get the adult version. Just make it baby friendly. So a plain yogurt would not have any added sugar. And if
Right.
you did want to add some flavor, you could add in a little pureed fruit yourself, or add in, something like that.
Okay. Okay. No, that's really helpful. What if a parent would ask, their pediatrician, do I need to make this stuff myself?
Yeah.
Or is it okay to buy baby food that's already ready to go? What's your opinion there?
Whatever works for your lifestyle.
Okay.
That is definitely my opinion. Baby number one for me, almost everything was store bought because I worked full time and she went to
Yeah.
daycare. I don't have time, and that's okay. So I would prioritize probably one or two things per week that I would make. Maybe it would be, I'm not even talking in, major things, like I'm talking spaghetti or something. Something very simple that I could pack. But beyond that, almost everything was store bought. Baby number two, on the flip side, was formula fed day one, but I also made almost everything homemade.
Oh,
The pros and cons, but really, I was working less, so
you
that
have
was
more
the biggest.
time.
And yeah, it worked out. It whatever works. That's the biggest
Okay.
thing to say.
Okay. Perfect. So we covered what to kind of start with, some good ideas. Now, what about, are there any foods that we should be avoiding during the starting solid period until they're, 12 months of age?
Yes, yes. So there's not a lot of foods, luckily.
Woo.
But number one, honey, which sounds so crazy, right? Like honey.
Yeah. I wouldn't think of
But
that.
honey is actually a risk of botulism, which is a foodborne illness. And in particular, infants under one can get really sick from it. So anything with honey, make sure you don't have any breads or any, you know, different seasonings. Like I know at one point I went and picked up peanut butter for my kids or and
And there's
whatnot, and
honey
it
in
was
it?
like there was a mixed honey. So just make sure you're
Wow.
not, yeah.
Okay.
Other things, of course, things that would be choking risks. So something that would be really hard. So like nuts, seeds, things like that that are a little bit bigger. Things that are round. So whole grapes, kind of
Yeah.
like when we were talking about, you know, there are ways to cut things, blueberries, things like that. Those can all be really like choking risks.
Yeah.
So
I'm thinking of like raw carrots. Like that would
yeah,
be
yes, yes,
that would be
raw
very
carrots,
hard.
raw fruits and veggies in that kind of a sense,
Yeah.
like unless they are truly cut correctly, yes, they definitely can be an
Okay.
issue. Other things, just things that are really high in like sugar and salts, you know, no, but that's not really good for anyone, but especially baby because their systems are so small.
Right. So
So
so what about like juice?
yeah, that's a
Because
good
I feel
question.
like that one, like sometimes people recommend that for constipation, like prune
Yeah.
juice. So where does that fit in?
Yeah. So if your doctor has specifically said, hey, give your kiddo some juice because your kiddo is dealing with constipation, that is one thing.
Okay.
But if it's just me who my kid does not have that problem and he just wants something sweet, no.
Not a good option.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just basically it's just sugar, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, no. Not
All
for
right.
not for little ones.
So
Save
if
that.
your doctor is recommending that as part of the constipation treatment plan, that's one thing, but likely stay away from
Yes.
juice
Yes. Yes.
until they're
I would
older.
hold
Because you
off
want
on
them to
that.
probably get foods from, or, eat calories from actual foods while they're exploring and figuring things
Exactly.
out instead of just drinking something.
Exactly. Exactly. You don't want those calories. And there's not a lot of like really great calories, I'm gonna say. You know, yes,
Right.
there are some extra vitamins in some of the juices, but it's not worthwhile, I would say.
Okay. Okay.
One other one that's pretty big is just undercooked, like eggs in particular. So I
Okay.
know, you know, my husband really likes like sunny side up eggs. That's not going to be a good option for my little one. Undercooked
But
meat,
scrambled's okay.
yes,
Okay.
yes, scrambled, hard boiled, omelets, anything that is cooked, awesome option.
Okay.
Um, Other thing like fish, you know, sushi, for example, would not be a good option right
Didn't think
away.
about that. Probably because
Yeah,
I wouldn't think that, a little infant is going to want that, but hey, you never know.
you would be surprised at the things that my kid has eaten this year. I honestly I got a little adventurous with it or at one point, and so he was eating like Thai and you know what I mean? He's
Yeah.
pretty cool for a while, and then he got a little picky
Wow.
now, but
That's awesome.
yeah, it was fun.
Okay, so just the big things is like making sure that they're cut into appropriate pieces and that they're likely cooked for something like, carrots. A raw carrot would not be good. Things
Mhm.
that are just really tough, nuts,
Mhm.
seeds, making sure that some protein things are cooked appropriately. And then the
Mhm.
big one is honey.
Honey, it's kind
Okay.
of the outlier that people don't usually think
Okay.
of.
Yeah. So we've talked about, how to start, when to start, um, foods that we could start with, foods to avoid. So I know that we talked a little bit about introducing foods that are, the top allergens.
Mhm.
So I feel like there's been more research coming out on how to do it. I feel like when we were probably growing up, it was like, oh my gosh, you can't introduce any of these
It
until
was.
there at least one, maybe even two, and now
Mhm.
research is changing that. So can you elaborate and maybe, are there resources out there that a pediatrician can provide, recommend to parents as they're kind of exploring this somewhat scary topic?
It is scary. It's scary because, you know, a lot of people already know what an allergic reaction could look like, right? And then on top of that, just like you were saying, forever, really, it's been recommended to avoid these things. But in 2015, it was actually a study was published that totally flipped it. And it showed that early introduction actually reduced the chance or risk of developing that allergy long term, if you will. So in particular, this study is called the LEAP study. And again, it was published in 2015. So that's really when the recommendation changed. So that's not that long ago, you
No.
know? So,
So you're saying that we missed out on eating peanut butter for a
you
while.
did.
That's so sad.
I
Okay.
know. But good news, I can give it to my little one.
Yay. Yay. Okay.
So
So
yeah.
this LEAP study came out and kind of changed, I guess,
Mhm.
what we thought was status quo, that it's not.
Exactly. So it actually showed that introducing these common well, peanuts in particular, between the ages of 4 to 10 months, and then continuing that to the age of 5 is how you would reduce these risks. So with that, it is recommended, once you start solids, start those common allergens. So those will be the cow's milk, eggs, wheat, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, shellfish, soy, and sesame. Sesame was just added. So you can start those as soon as you want. Those could be
Wow.
one of
Okay.
your
So as
first
soon
foods
as you
as well.
start the solid, okay. So now I'm guessing we probably don't want to give 3 of these top foods in one day, because then if something happens, we're not going to know. So
Right.
how should these foods be introduced, and like what amount?
Yeah. So that's a good question too. So overall, this is kind of the structure I usually would go through with my kiddo. Let's say on like Sunday, I'm going to introduce an allergen. So let's introduce peanuts this week. So because it is a common allergen, I usually did give a couple extra days to kind of get used to that one.
Okay.
So I would do, let's say Sunday, Monday, Tuesday would be focused on just peanuts. And then on Wednesday, I would introduce another new food, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I usually would only do one common allergen per week. So usually
Okay.
I would do that common allergen, and then I would do like a vegetable, and then I would do a fruit or something like that. That way it's all spaced out, and
So there's
you're
no
still getting there.
confusion. Okay. And then you would give that food again, like give the peanuts or, again, and then do a fruit and a veggie, and then repeat for that week.
Yep, exactly. So I would try to basically include these common allergens once they're introduced at least once a week if I could.
Okay. Okay. So because this is still kind of new, I mean, what tools are out there for parents, or like where could we direct them to? Because
Yeah.
I'm sure, especially now, this is also a good point too. What if, this is their second child and their first child has a really bad reaction to peanuts or cow's milk or eggs? I could
Yes.
see a family being very anxious. So is there any different regulations or rules for those types of families?
So yes, I will say this. If you already have a child, or if you yourself have a history of food allergies, or even just allergies in general, like for example, my husband is quite allergic to wasps. And so, just that's kind of in my mind, just something I kind of,
Yeah.
you never know. So have that conversation with your pediatrician around that 3-month mark, because that's going to be right before
You
you're going to
start
be
this.
introducing. A lot of times they might recommend to either hold off on that one, or maybe they actually want you to introduce it even sooner. It kind of just depends on the situation.
Okay.
Sometimes they will set you up with, I'm going to say like kind of prophylaxis, kind of, maybe they will give an EpiPen just in case, or kind of develop a plan of care. That way you already have that plan in place for when you're introducing those.
Okay. Okay.
Your other question, I actually have a program available for introducing allergens. So I have a 1-hour masterclass, and then I also have a group program where I take you week by week and introduce
That's
an allergen.
great.
Yeah. So
I bet that would be good for not only parents, but pediatricians to kind of walk through that
Absolutely.
as well, so that they
Yeah,
feel more comfortable kind of helping families out during this, transition period.
absolutely. So like that schedule we just kind of went over, that's something that like we really implement and go through kind of, I don't want to say hold hands, but like one on one and really do
Yeah.
that together.
But that's really helpful because, this is a
Absolutely.
scary time, especially
It
like
is.
we were just saying, if you have a family history of allergies and you're just,
Mhm.
you want to check in and make sure that everything is going smoothly, or if something happens, you have a plan of action. So I really like that. So kind of
Yeah,
communicating with your care provider kind of along those steps so that they know
yeah,
what's going on and they could intervene if something happens.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, I feel like those are the big questions. On the topic of starting solids, what's the difference between purees and baby-led weaning, and what the schedule looks like. So I really appreciate your expertise and your insight and your great tips. I think this is going to be so helpful for parents and pediatricians. So really appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us, Jessica.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on here. This was so fun. I enjoyed talking
Yeah,
with you
absolutely.
guys.
And so we'll be providing just links to some of the resources that Jessica talked about, as well as her own website. We can also provide a link to the LEAP study for anyone who would like to read that. I know there's a lot of great information in that clinical trial
Mhm.
as well. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.